When I quit my job, my entire career or my entire focus for the majority of my life to that point had been on quitting. It took me a long time to realize that after I quit, I didn't have a direction that I was working towards. I had this vision of success and I had this vision of greatness. It wasn't really tied to anything, and it wasn't tied to a particular field. I had this vision of nonprofit, and I had this vision of helping people around the world, and all of this kind of stuff. And all these grand ideas, but I wasn't doing anything to make those come alive because I thought that was going to be a thing that happened in the future once I achieved success.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. Today's guest, Patrick Menefee, is a Gobundance Emerge member. I love seeing his development and what he's been doing. He is a coach, an entrepreneur, an investor. He is the founder of Patrick Menefee Coaching, and he has the Menefee Monday Motivator newsletter, which we'll talk all about as we get to the end of this episode. Patrick, brother, welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it.
Really, it's not like we've been talking for 20 minutes already.
No, not at all. Good conversation to start.
I love it, man. Well, let's dive in. Let's talk about you, your backstory. I mean, I talk about you being an entrepreneur, or you're in real estate, you own a business, all this stuff, but give us kind of the beginnings. Where from? What do you do? Where are you today?
Yeah, the entrepreneurial piece started from when I was a kid. I grew up in Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis, and I had two amazing supportive parents, and I watched my mom build a Mary Kay business. And well, I can't say I really watched her build. She already had a very successful business by the time that I came along. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I saw. And so I saw what she did. She was an incredible leader. She was an incredible, I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but she passed away when I was at college. And at her memorial service, there were hundreds of people that I'd never met before that all said something along the lines of like, I met her once and she had this impact on me. So that was what I grew up with. And I saw that the power of her business. I saw how she was incredibly present as a parent. I knew that she was building something meaningful, but also at the same time, she was at every baseball game. She was involved in school. She was at every event. She worked from home. She worked a lot, but she was always there. And so that was what I grew up with. And I had that mindset as a kid. I started my first business and when I was like 10 or 12 or something like that, and always carried that mindset with me. And then naturally I went the route that any budding and aspiring entrepreneur goes, and I joined the Army. Not exactly the most, incubator grounds for entrepreneurship, but I did ROTC in college, went active duty after that for 6 years. And that mindset carried with me throughout the whole thing. To the point where I always kind of treated it like a business, and I always looked for ways that I could improve the organization and make things more efficient and really just make things better. Cause there's a lot of shit in the military that's just dumb and doesn't make sense and isn't done efficiently or well. I know that might be hard to believe, but that is, when I look back, I even have on one of my reviews in the Army, it was a great review from a boss that I loved. And he included a note about how I was called the squeaky wheel from time to time, because I was always calling out things and always trying to fix things. And I wouldn't shut up if something was wrong and I saw a way to fix it. So that mindset, like it was a very different mindset that kind of separated me from people, and not a lot of people fully aligned with or got. And I think that was probably the first point where I realized the benefit of getting around the tribe and getting around people that are like-minded, because I found a couple of people that were also like me and I latched onto them. Fast forward to 6 years later, I was out of the Army and I moved out here to North Carolina. I started consulting, and for me, consulting was kind of a natural fit. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted some type of business, but consulting seemed like a smart way to get some experience in a variety of different areas and figure it out. So I did that for a while and quickly realized less than a year in that I wanted to do something more. I wasn't thrilled with where I was going with that. And I knew I needed to actually take the leap and start taking action towards building my own life. So that there's a lot of different pieces that got me into real estate as a part of that. But ultimately one of them was, I don't even think you and I have ever talked about this, but I read the book Tribe of Millionaires back in early 2019. And I don't remember how I found it, probably through Bigger Pockets or something like that. But I ended up reading that about 2 months after my dad died. And that was, I read that book and I couldn't put it down. First of all, I also couldn't stop sobbing as I was reading it. Just with the part about his dad and how I had a very different relationship with my dad. I had a wonderful relationship with my dad. So that part didn't really align, but that carried throughout. And so at that moment, I read that book and I vowed that I was going to be a part of this community in some way, shape or form.
Mm.
and realize the level of accountability and the power of having like-minded people that you can grow with. So fast forward later on in 2019, bought my first rental property. It was a 4-unit place. A week later, I closed on another 6 units. A month or two later, closed on another one, another one. And 13 months later, October of 2020, then at that point, I had 21 rental units. I had 2 flips and I quit my job. I also, I put in my 2 weeks notice on a Friday, and on the prior Saturday found out that we were having a baby that was totally unexpected. So that was a little surprise wrench that got thrown in there, but obviously very happy about that now. But since then, a lot of exploration, experimentation. I didn't realize at that moment, but 2 years later, I realized that when I quit my job, that was a big monumental moment for me. But at that point, I ended up losing my purpose. And we can talk about that later too. But I tried to figure out what the hell to do over the next couple of years. And so I was already flipping houses. That's how I made my money then after I quit, and took that into buying more real estate. I started a flipping business, ended up hating it, shut down the flipping business, thanks primarily to a major nudge, and less of a nudge, more of a kick in the face from some coaches at the Gobundance event last year. And then set out on another year of discovery. That discovery went from flipping to multifamily to I bought a business, and then finally realized that the core theme throughout all of it was coaching. And what I actually cared about, what I gave a shit about, was helping people that want to, they're not comfortable with the trajectory of their lives like I was, and they want to do something different. And a lot of times that looks like people want to leave their job, but in other cases it's people that are comfortable in their job, but they know that they're capable of more and they want to figure out what that is. So that's now my primary focus. I've still got the business. I'm getting rid of the last of my real estate actually, but that's my primary focus now, is how can I help people become the best version of themselves and get on a trajectory that they are excited about to actually live up to their potential. Because it took me a lot to get there. I learned a lot along the way, made a lot of mistakes, and now my purpose in life, I feel, is to help other people do the same thing.
You gave me chills when you were talking about the story in that book, the Trap Millionaires book, with the father and your. I mean, not it's not about the book, but about you being able to insert yourself into that. Like you said, I think in the book, the main character had a problem with his father, and after his father passes, he regrets not having been more involved in his life. Where for you, it's more just the idea, like, this guy lost his father, I just lost my father. I literally, my the hair on my arm stood up. So man, that hit me. I want to go back real quick. Mom, how did mom pass?
Cancer.
Ay, ay, ay. So how old was she?
She was 60,
And dad, how old was dad when he passed?
78. They were 9 years apart in age, and they were older, but
Jeez, man. So you're only what, 30, what,
34. So
34.
my mom passed when I was in college. I think it was 21, and then my dad when I was 30.
How does that, consciously or otherwise, or have you unpacked this? I know you've done a lot of work and you've done a lot of things, buying real estate to the scale of 21 units, which is significant. I mean, the average unit count per real estate investor is 1.72. You scaled it to 21, and then we're like, all right, good, move on to buying a business, and then now you're in coaching. Does the passing of your parents at a young age, is it a present thought in your mind, and is it a driver at all? Does it scare you at all? Like, how does that show up for you?
It Yes to all of those. It it's always a part of it. There's a major piece that I'm disappointed about where they didn't get to see any of this. So I didn't buy my first real estate deal until after my dad passed. I had done, they'd seen the drive, they'd seen the success in the military. I mean, my mom saw a portion of it when I was in ROTC, but my dad saw a lot of it, saw corporate, all of that kind of stuff. So there's that component of there's a drive, especially with my mom. I mean, the business that she had, the impact that she had, the way that people talked about how she impacted them and changed their lives, that wave that she created that still to this day people talk about, that is something that's incredibly inspiring. I've also realized and unpacked over the past year that there's a lot that I almost put too much pressure on myself there. And that is she had, with all of her success, she was she always had one additional level that she was trying to get to in Mary Kay. It's called national sales director, and she was right below it, and she was never quite able to get there. And I think one of the things that I realized over the past year was I was trying to do a lot to make up for that, and so I wanted to because she couldn't get to that last level. I felt like I needed to. And there's a lot that I had to unpack there to figure out and realize that that's not really healthy. And that was kind of holding me back in a way. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the mindset comes from them, the values that they instilled in me, even with, with my family, with my wife and my daughter, the way that we operate, all of that, they're a huge driving force in that. So
What's happened in the last year? Because I mean, I see it with you, having been close to you and emerge. I see you, your trajectory, and it does feel like with each step you're kind of like shedding some sort of weight and getting lighter and flying faster. That's at least the what I see. What happened in the last year? Like what coaching? Like what has it been in the last year that's changed things for you, or that's allowed you to unpack and really kind of get clear on some of this stuff?
coaching is an enormous part of it, coaching and the community. But I, I guess it started probably 2 years ago. Well, technically it started when I quit my job, but when I quit my job, my entire career or my entire focus for the majority of my life to that point had been on quitting. And so it took me a long time to realize that after I quit, I didn't have a direction that I was working towards. I had this vision of success and I had this vision of greatness, but it wasn't really tied to anything, and it wasn't tied to a particular field. I also had this vision of impact and this vision of nonprofit, and I had this vision of helping people around the world and all of this kind of stuff and all these grand ideas, but I wasn't doing anything to make those come alive because I thought that was going to be a thing that happened in the future once I achieved success. And so what happened over the past year, really culminating at the event that we did in Miami, was bringing first of all bringing that into right now. I was at the beginning of 2022. I went from flipping houses relatively successfully, made a good bit of money in it, to building a house flipping business. And by the time we got to that event in April, I was fucking miserable. I was more miserable in my business than I was in my job. And we were bleeding money. I had hired a team. Ironically, I flipped a bunch of houses and then I built a house flipping company and we didn't flip any houses. I just spent a lot of money on infrastructure and systems and everything else. It was a disaster. It was a complete disaster. And there's a million reasons for that I won't get into right now. But what I realized at that event was I wasn't going down a purposeful path, and flipping had no. When I said that I wanted to make an impact, flipping wasn't doing that. It was kind of delaying because I never spent the time processing, figuring out where I wanted to go. So I dove in after that event and unpacked a lot of stuff for myself. Unpacked a lot of I knew at that point that I wasn't going the direction that I needed to go, but I had no fucking clue where to go. And I started. I leaned on my coach at that point. I've been working with the same coach, actually, probably 2 times a week for the past year, over a year now, and leaning on this community, leaning on my pod and everybody else, and exploring a lot of figuring out a lot of what I don't want in order to figure out what I do want. And so if you take a 10,000 foot view of the past year, I am you would probably look at me and say like this is the shiny object guy. Like this is the guy that you don't want to be. But for me that was what I needed because when I was in my flipping business, I I kept going and I almost drove myself to bankruptcy because of the idea that I couldn't quit. And because I had made a commitment to this and you've heard Brandon Turner's analogy of the bridge.
Building little bridges and going building them a certain amount of distance before you start the next bridge, build it all the way across, then build the next bridge, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I had that bridge image firmly planted in my head and I was like, I've got to build this fucking bridge no matter what happens. Like everything is crumbling. I'm actually building a bridge that goes to nowhere, but I better build this bridge because I can't quit. And so that held me back and that stopped me. I needed that kick in the head in Miami to move me. And so at that point then you could call it shiny object syndrome over the next year, but I call it healthy experimentation. And I needed to first look at multifamily real estate because that was what I knew. I had bought an 18 unit apartment and that was a way of playing bigger. Realized that I didn't want to do that because I was tired of real estate. I found business acquisition. I thought that seemed exciting because I always wanted to be a business owner. So why not just buy someone else's? And the process was exciting. But once I bought it, it wasn't fulfilling. It didn't give me what I wanted. And so eventually, through a ton of work with my coach and a lot of personal work, that was when I realized that the common thread among everything that I'd done dating back to college, honestly, was I'd always found a way to coach people. I'd always find a way to do process improvement on a more individual level in order to help people really achieve what they're capable of. And that took it took a lot of an enormous amount of work over that time, but that transformation has steadily progressed to something where now I feel like on a daily basis, as opposed to doing something now to make an impact in the future, I'm doing something now that every single day I'm intentional about doing something that makes a difference for people. And it's way more fulfilling and rewarding than where I was a little over a year ago when I hated what I was doing.
I love a healthy experimentation. It's funny, there's all these, there's all these rules people set up for certain things. You have to focus, and it's like, yes, at some point you do, but you're in life change mode. Like you said, you're going down an unfulfilling path, and you're looking for fulfillment. And I see it for me too when I talk to people that are 30, 35, 40 years old, especially married, kids, something like that, where their life feels complex. They remove permission from themselves to be able to experiment and try different things. But me leaving my job was the same thing. It was like, I'm going to be in multifamily. And then it was like, well, I kind of like talking about multifamily. So I call it the pivot. The pivot became, I actually, I'll buy multifamily, but I like this networking group I created around multifamily. And then it was like, but within that, I don't like talking about multifamily that much anymore. But I do like sort of the community mindset, that sort of things, and the brand building. So I went into that, and then that led to Emerge. And you know what I mean? So I think there's aspects in our life or times in our life where you've got to get on that kind of fuck around, find out spectrum. You got to get on that graph. And the more you fuck around, the more you find out. And it's the advice that any of us would give to a 20-year-old. All of us would like when a 20-year-old's like, I don't know what to do. It's like, then go do everything. You got time, figure it out. But we don't allow ourselves that same advice when we're 35 or 40 because we feel like we're out of time. Like, oh, we missed our window. We're past our prime. It's like you still got half or more of your life left. Hopefully, not even hopefully, statistically likely, you have half or more of your life left. So a year of fucking around and finding out is actually a healthy, like you said, it's a healthy experimentation phase. So I like the reframe on that because I think it is something that when you get bogged down in the advice of you got to focus to, you got to go an inch wide and a mile deep. Yes. And you also need time to find what that inch is, if that makes any sense. You need space to create. You need space to break some things and figure things out. And I love how you just kind of went through that. So that's incredible.
Well, two things. One, I think that last point, if you go a mile deep or you try to go a mile deep in the wrong hole, you're digging with the wrong tools. There's a million analogies that you can use, but it's not fruitful and it's not good. You don't want to go that route. So find the right hole first. And I think that's in if I were to take the bridge analogy a step back, it's like before you build the bridge, you've got to make sure that there's I don't know, I'm not an engineer, so I'm making shit up, but you got to make sure that there's footings. You got to make sure that you survey the land. Like you've got to do all the prep work first. So go survey 14 different bridges and then figure out what bridge you want to build. And I think the other component of that too is when you do it and when you experiment, to your point on you went from thing to thing and you realize that I love talking about multifamily. Actually, I love talking about things. I don't actually love talking about multifamily. When you experiment, I think it's really important to then also dig in and say, what do I like and dislike about the thing that I'm doing? Like just saying, I don't want to do this anymore and I'm going to move on. Cool. That's like on a macro level. Now I know, okay, maybe I don't want to do real estate right now, but on a micro level, like why? What is it about this that I don't want to do? Also, what is it about this that got me interested in the first place? And now how do I use that to kind of continually refine as I look into the next thing? Because there's in every single one of them, there's lessons, but you got to actually pay attention to dig in and ask the why a couple of times to figure out what the lessons are.
I love every bit of that, man. Every bit of that. And for those in the audience that are listening that have an infantile brain like me, I won't allow this moment to pass. You can drop a comment if you're watching on YouTube, maybe a hand raise. If anyone else smirked when Patrick said you got to find the right hole, you're not the only one. I was one of them. I'm going to guess 25% of our audience smiled for a second there, but maybe I'm wrong. I'd be curious to know how many more of you are 12-year-olds, but we'll figure that out.
I love it.
Let's clean up a couple of things. When you were consulting, what were you consulting on?
A bunch of shit that I didn't know. Technically, I was in the payment space, but I was also in risk I was basically technically I was in the payment space and I was helping companies in their payment systems and credit card in particular to adhere to regulatory guidelines and basically not be shitty.
but you fail forward, right? You were doing it. What is it? Ready, fire, aimed it, right? Like, all right, I'll jump in, and you found out that it wasn't quite for you. But I like what you said. There's an element of that actually presents itself in what you're doing today with coaching that you really did love, the interaction, the helping people, kind of get to a certain level. So
Yeah, it was wild because I was really good at it, and I didn't know what the hell I was talking about from a technical standpoint. And I think that it's an important realization that sometimes I forget in the coaching space too sometimes, but I dove in, and my curiosity in what was going on and my ability to kind of see the things that were and weren't there and kind of read between the lines, that allowed me to dig in really hard and help really improve some of these systems and also set the bar for other people on how they evaluate them. And going into it, I had no idea what it was. And part of the reason that I knew that I wasn't going to stick with consulting forever and I wasn't even going to get into a management role was because I had no interest in the technical aspect of it. And I didn't want to become in order to excel, you had to become an expert in one particular area. And I didn't care about the areas enough. I cared about the problem solving and the solutions. And I think that's important for people to realize is you don't need to know every technical detail. Now there's obviously places where you do, but to help people, like, you don't need to know every technical detail of it. You just need to be able to see patterns. You need to be able to see what's there and what's not there, and hear what's not being said, and kind of piece things together. And that's a skill that I think more people have than they realize, but they get held back by the technical knowledge.
I like that. That's very, very true. The business that you purchased, what kind of business is that? The one that you run right now?
A headache. uh it's a lawn care company.
Lawn care. Okay,
We do a
got
little
it.
bit of
It's
landscaping too, but
something you're looking to scale, or are you kind of like, all right, no, I want to operationalize it, run it, grow, as we grow, but I'm not all in on that. That's just sort of, is it more of a passive endeavor for you?
I mean, it's not as passive as I want it to be right now, but that's the target with it. I want to get it to a point where I can ultimately sell it in the future. I'm not looking to blow it up to a multi-million dollar business or anything like that, but I want to get it to a point where if I do any additional business acquisitions, it will be very strategically in order to help it make it easier on me and grow where it makes sense. So
Got it. Okay. And last thing, did your mom have a pink Cadillac?
yeah, that's what I learned to drive in.
Did you really? The Mary Kay,
Yep.
my mother's a Mary Kay consultant, so she
Oh,
loves the
really?
whole story. I love what I love about Mary Kay. It's funny, and you probably know this, but she was 45, quit a high performing or a high level corporate career to start Mary Kay. She's one of those examples of, like, it's never too late when you're aligned with what you wanted to. And I mean, she created a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. I mean, it's well known the world around, but it wasn't a lifetime, an early lifetime thing. She didn't figure this out till she was 45. She was a corporate exec or a high level corporate leader, but couldn't break through. And so her purpose around it was, to give a place for women to not have a glass ceiling, essentially. And she didn't, go out and complain and moan about it. Instead, she went out and created something incredible. But she was 45 when she did that. So very inspiring story with Mary
I
Kay.
didn't realize she was 45. That's incredible.
Yeah. Yep. I researched that. So, hey, everyone, thanks for listening. I hope you're getting tremendous value. I want to make sure that with this information, you have a way in which you can integrate it into your life. Best way to do that is being a member of any of our Gobundance communities. Just go to Gobundance.com, submit your application. No matter your net worth, we've got the community for you. Back to the show. All right, let's dive into the Gobundance member question. So we're going to first talk about the pillars. There are 6 pillars in Gobundance: horizontal income, bucket list adventure, extreme accountability, age-defying health, authentic relationships, and genuine contribution. Getting better at that every time I do this. Which one of those pillars are you crushing it in? Or in which one of those pillars are you crushing it?
I think the relationships, and especially relationships in with my family. I've over the past year, over this year of development, I've made a really deliberate effort to be present, to be family focused, and so I've been building. But I do my best to. My daughter goes to daycare in the morning, and I drop her off at 8 o'clock, and we pick her up. She gets home at 5, and I do my best to cram everything into those hours, and then some after she goes to bed if necessary. But it's been wonderful. The amount of presence that we've had together, the quality time that we've had. I think there's definitely areas in relationships that I can improve, but that is the one that I'm focused on the most right now, and I absolutely love where I am with it.
That's incredible. I love that, man. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that too. That's a really good one to be crushing it in. Let's flip it around. In which GoBundance pillar could you use more support and or accountability?
I'm not gonna lie, I struggle with this one a little bit because I feel like there's all of them I can definitely improve in. One in particular, I think bucket list adventure. And I think there's a couple of different, I'll get that in a couple of different ways. We've got a couple of big trips planned and stuff like that are exciting. But on a I could use work there on actually putting some of the things, some of the bigger things, the bucket list things on the calendar. That's one. But I think honestly, more in the interim, more in the for me personally, spending time doing things that I enjoy and hobbies. I last year I bought a mountain bike, and it was, as a part of the personal development piece. It's weird to say that, but buying this bike was a big deal for me because it was the most that I'd ever most that I'd ever spent on pleasure for myself, outside of vacations and stuff like that. And I haven't ridden the damn thing near as much as I want to, because I haven't taken the time and set aside the time for it. And part of that is because I'm really excited about what I'm doing with my coaching business and everything else, but I just haven't created the time for it. So there's stuff like that that I've gotten better about celebrating the little things here at home and going and, enjoying a night on the patio with a glass of bourbon and a good cigar with my wife. Um, Little things like that, like celebrating little victories, or like you see the Legos here. Like that was every time I sell a real estate deal, I buy a Lego set, and that's my little celebration. So I've been trying to focus on the little wins, but I need that in between. I need to spend more time dedicating time to myself and some of those hobbies.
What's it? Give me an example of something on your bucket list. What jumps to mind?
Taking a first class Emirates flight, and then doing a Viking Scandinavian cruise.
Got it. Got it. Okay, cool.
So
So
ideally, take the
yeah.
Emirates flight to a Viking Scandinavian cruise, but
I like that. I like that. And the prohibiting you right now, is it just cost? I mean, Emirates first class flights aren't cheap. Is it just cost, or is it something else?
I think a lot of it is cost, because we've got some trips that we're planning that are like we're going to. Have you ever heard of Svalbard?
No.
Northernmost inhabited piece of land on planet Earth. I don't know, really close to the North Pole, north of Norway.
Where? Oh, it's in Scandinavia. It's up there.
Yep, yep. It's
Wow.
it's technically a part of Norway, but yeah, Svalbard. I look it up. It
I can't even
looks
spell.
amazing.
How do you spell? I can't even pronounce what you just said. I think you sneezed. Small bard. What is it?
Svalbard. I'm sure there's like little dots above it and stuff like that. I don't know, but if you if you type that in, it should come up. But
Okay.
it's a place that it's incredible. You can go see the Northern Lights like every night, and
That's
it's
cool.
just well, you got to go when it's not light for 23 hours a day. But
Look this up while we're talking.
so we've got a place like that. Like we've got that. We got those types of things. There's I think where I think about some of the little stuff that I could have done. I've got something like I'm a big Green Bay Packers fan, and a Packers playoff game. Now, I look at that now, especially now that we lose Aaron Rodgers, and think about the fact that it might be a long time before I have the opportunity to do that again. So, how can I lean in and do more of those types of things?
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. All right, cool. Well, that's good to know, because I think there's I see bucket lists sometimes. We just did a post on this in Emerge, and everybody's dropping their bucket list in there. And you go through and you're like, why can't you do this now? Kind of thing. Like, what's the holdup here? Like, you're calling it a bucket list, but is that really bucket list, or like, when can you do it this year? There's still 6 months left, and it sounds like you're doing some really cool stuff, though. If you're going all the way up to this place. I don't even want to try to
Sneeze bard.
Svalbard. But no, that's good to know. I like that. All right, let's do this one. Where in your life are you potentially flirting with disaster?
I feel like disaster might be a little bit strong for it.
Everyone says that. That's okay. Go for it.
If it were a year ago, I would have said something different, but I've done a lot of work over the past year. So I think right now the biggest thing is structure and kind of implementing 80/20 better. There's If I look at the ebbs and flows over the past year, I kind of swung like a pendulum in a bunch of different, like I created this enormous structure in my real estate business. And then when I shut down the real estate business, I said, fuck that. And I just went the complete other direction and turned off structure. And so I'm starting to get back to it. And I've kind of tried to structure my weeks so that I've got most of my client calls and those things later on in the week and consolidate in a couple of days. But now I find myself in that I've got 2 days where I generally don't have client calls, and they're my get work done days. And I don't give enough structure to those days. I don't have enough focus compared to what I could. And also part of, thinking about 80/20, I've been reading, or I've been listening to 10X is easier than 2X lately. And they talk a lot about 80/20 in that book. And right now it feels like, because I'm excited about the things that I'm doing, it feels like almost everything is a 20, and that's not sustainable, and that's not good. So, I mean, it's good that I'm excited about it, but also that's not good for productivity because it means that I'm kind of bouncing all over the place. So,
I see. I love that, and I think when I think about the word disaster, and this is maybe popping up in my life right now. I got you by a decade, right? So I'm in my mid 40s. You're in your mid 30s. And I do think about the idea of delaying self actualization, if it's even possible. Like if you listen to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's the top of the pyramid, right? Like getting to self actualization. And I think his estimate on how many people actually achieve that is like less than 1%, which immediately makes any high achiever say, like, I want to be that. I want to be self actualized. But to truly enjoy the benefits or the fruits of your vision while you're physically able to in so many ways, right? There's a sense of urgency. Like if you're not focused on the right 20, if you're not giving yourself, space, like now that you've done the experimentation and you're in your lane, if you don't go all in on the highest and best use of you and really align with your purpose and seek that fulfillment and drive forward, all of a sudden you're 40 or 45 and you've given away years of your daughter's life that you could have done certain things with or whatever because you didn't pursue self-actualization. And that's how I'm thinking in my mind. For me, I'll be 55 and it's like I'm still young, but my kids will have aged to the point of being out of the house, at least one of them at that point, so there's something about that feeling like disaster to me, or at least by labeling it that, it gives me more of a sense of, hey, get into your 20. Stop being distracted by like this is a 20 for me. Getting on a podcast and this is definitely a 20 for me. So doing this, I feel completely on purpose. So anyway, I think that's where that disaster part comes. Is like not immediately, you're not going to like crash and burn in the next month or 2 months or 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But you look back and you say, man, had I just whatever, and you can give away a lot of not even time because you're still going to have a good time, but the results that you could have achieved toward the vision that we all have for our lives, which are all big, you know, just that little bit extra that you could have done, not more time and energy, but more time on task or more getting rid of the distractions and staying in your 20. That's the disaster part to me. So,
yeah, I agree with that. And as I talked about before about how I've been intentional with my family and trying to keep the between the bumpers of those hours, that's like if I were to let my time outside of that slip because I'm not taking advantage of the time that I have in those 8, 9 hours or whatever it is because I'm wasting time. Like that's not okay. Also, at the same time, if that delays the process of like you're talking about, like that is also a form of disaster. And also on the flip side, there's a part of me that's also realized over the past year that I got to give myself a little bit more of a break on some of these things. But I'm always trying to find that harmony of giving myself a break versus letting myself slip. And I think that can be a very delicate balance sometimes.
well said. Well said. All right, you've talked about a couple, but I don't know if you have anything more specific. In what specific way has Gobundance or Emerge impacted your life?
Where do I start? It, I mean, it's completely altered the trajectory. I think about the past year and a half, and I've done back in 2021. You had Jason Drees on a case study, and I resonated a lot with him. And I got into his Mindset Academy. I went to a couple of his events, and it was that coupled with your conversation with Joe Wexler that led to me buying my business. And it was a connection that I made at one of his events that created a lot for me. Um, the we talked about the Miami event, but that I cannot state firmly enough how important that event was in my life, and that how that was a turning point for me. So that alone was worth everything. And then the connections that I've made, I think I realize right now as I talk to some of my coaching clients that are working corporate jobs that are trying to do something else, you've got that crabs in a bucket kind of mentality of they're trying to be the one that goes out and does something else. And also they want to talk about what they're doing naturally, as any entrepreneur does, and they don't have anybody to talk to about it. And I realize I can make a post in a group and talk to 25, 30, 50 people, or I can go to an event and talk to people. I can go to my pod. I can give people like, I have so many places as a result of this community that I have that outlet that I almost sometimes take for granted the fact that not everybody has that. And it, I want more. And that's like my coaching business is turning into a funnel into GoBundance Emerge. But I think there's a beauty to it because I think a lot of people have put, a lot of times people put pressure on their family or on the people around them to accept who they are and understand who they are. And because they need that fulfillment and they need that understanding. But if you can get that from a group like Emerge and you can get that type of respect and understanding and not that look of what the fuck are you doing, you now don't need that from those people. And so you can accept them for who they are. Those relationships can be what they are. They don't need to have added pressure to it because you've got a community like this. And it's something that it's been phenomenally important. I don't know what that means, but it's been really important for me over the past year and a half. So
No, that's great, man. And for whatever it's worth, hey, we pay you if you refer people in, man. We pay you. For anybody out there, if you remember, we pay you. So, no, I love that. I love the perspective on that, and what you said about crabs in a barrel resonates. I've used that reference so many times, but that is especially for that person, whether it's an employee or in a circumstance where they're trying to grow their business or whatever. For some reason, that is the one thing that everyone understands, but they don't take action on, is finding the community that can be the opposite of that drags them up as opposed to trying to drag them back. So I think it's a really good analogy. What advice would you give to a new or prospective member of Emerge or Gobundance, however you want to take that?
one is just do it, get in here and join the tribe and do it. But another piece is understand what phase you're in. And it kind of like we were talking about before the call, like there was a mode where, especially last year, I was in exploration and experimentation, and I needed information. I needed to absorb. And there's a lot of people that are in that phase. Also, there's a lot of people that they pick something, but they still stay in absorption mode and information mode, and then they get distracted. And that's where shiny object syndrome kicks in, and they hear a bunch of different ideas. So know what phase you're in. If it's time to gather information to better make a decision, then go all in. Look for all the different opportunities, figure out what you like, figure out what you want to do, because there's all of those resources here. Also, once you know the direction that you are going, or even what you want to try for a little bit, dig in on that for a little bit and kind of cut out the noise, because it can be really easy. I know I caught myself sometimes going down. I mean, everybody makes it sound brilliant to do something, and that's part of the power of being here is you have all these different opportunities, but you don't need to chase every single thing, especially if you're not in experimentation mode. So just know what phase you're in and act accordingly.
I like that. I like the two different phases, right? It's like, mile deep, inch wide mode, experimentation mode. And I think it just gives people permission to do that. Cause we don't, when we get past a certain age, it feels like we don't give ourselves permission on something like this. What am I going to do with my life to experiment and try things out? So
Every time you say mile wide, inch deep, my 12-year-old brain comes out. So thank you for that.
there we go. I'm really curious to see if we get some comments on that. All right, let's go to the GoBundance card game question. King of Diamonds. Actually, this question, man, I always pull this up before. I never tell the guest the question. And it's funny how sometimes at the beginning, when I see the question, it's like, oh, that'll be interesting. And then after, or fun. And then after I hear your story, I'm very curious about this question. So do you think you will outlive most others your age, and why?
Well, there's an immediate part of me that just competitively says yes. And I try to take care of myself. But there's also the realistic side of me, knowing my family and having family that died younger than they should have. And that kind of not constant because I've been working on a lot over the past year, but fear of death, which isn't healthy, but it's there. And so I would very much like to say yes. There's a realism side of me or a pessimistic side of me that says, looking at historical events, maybe not. But I'm glad you asked that question, because I would definitely like to lean a lot more into the yes side of that.
Well, but that's what I mean. Like initially, it's like, it's fun. But then when you talk about your mom passing at a young age, and your dad was young but older, obviously, 78 is probably about like the average life expectancy of a male. So, but still, you were young, and he probably had years left that he could have lived. I don't know the exact situation. So to have experienced what you have, that question took on a very different meaning when I saw it. So I appreciate you diving in on that, man.
Yeah, and I think I think about that a lot now. Like I think about that in an entirely different perspective now, because when I moved to Charlotte, I was sitting in the backseat of a car and we got in a head-on collision like a month after I moved here. And luckily I walked away from it. I had some shoulder problems and some other stuff like that. But like now I see that situation, and I think about that in the context of my family and in some of those fears almost. I'm like that, like just like that, things change, and you can it adds a sense of urgency for sure, but that like I don't know, that's very much changed my perception of the brevity of life. and how important it is to make the most. So whether I do outlive people or not, I think the most important piece of that is how do you make sure that you start making the difference that you want to make now and stop delaying that into the future. Cause that was part of one of the biggest things that hit me last year was you combine that with this question. I have no idea how long I'm going to live. So I better fucking do something with my life right now. So
Man. All right. The Menefee Monday Motivator. How do people find that? Where do they go grab that? How do we get this newsletter?
go to patrickmenefee.com and you can subscribe on there. And I think you can also get there through my Instagram too, which is the Patrick Menefee.
The Patrick Menefee. And then the coaching program, is there information on the website about your coaching, not program, but your coaching? Is that available on the website?
Yes, it is.
Beautiful. Patrick, man, I appreciate you doing this. Thanks for ranting a bit with me at the beginning of this before we even started recording. And I just love talking to you, man. I love getting more and more knowledge of you in depth from your life and learning from you and being inspired by you. So I appreciate the way you show up, brother.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I appreciate it. And you and this tribe and what you've created here have undoubtedly changed my life.